I want you to think about the last text message you received from someone you care about. Not a stranger, not a coworker, not someone distant. Someone close. Someone who matters. Now, I want you to read it again in your mind, not for what it says, but for what it feels like. Does it feel like them? Does it carry the same weight it used to? Does it feel like that person is fully there, fully present, or does it feel like something shifted, something you can't quite name, something that leaves you scrolling back through older messages, trying to figure out when exactly the warmth started to fade? Because here's something that most people never realize until it's already too late. When someone begins to lose interest in you, they almost never say it directly. They don't sit you down and explain that their feelings are changing. They don't announce that they're pulling away. What they do instead is far more subtle, far more invisible, and honestly, far more painful. They change their words. Not all of them, just a few. Sometimes just 3. And those 3 words, which sound completely normal on the surface, carry an enormous amount of psychological weight underneath. They are not random. They are not accidental. They appear in a very specific pattern, at a very specific stage of emotional withdrawal, and once you learn to recognize them, you will never hear them the same way again. But before I reveal what those 3 words are, and I promise I will, I need you to understand something first. Because if I just gave you the words without the context, you'd do what most people do. You'd oversimplify. You'd start looking for them everywhere. You'd panic the next time someone said them. And that's not the point. The point is to understand the system behind the words, the behavioral pattern that produces them. So you can tell the difference between someone who's having a bad week and someone who's already halfway out the door. That distinction matters more than anything else I'll say today, so stay with me. If this kind of content resonates with you, if it makes you think more carefully about the people in your life, subscribe to this channel, leave a like, and pay close attention to what comes next. Because this is one of those videos that genuinely changes how you interpret human behavior from this point forward. Now, let's start with a question. What does it actually look like when someone begins to lose interest? Most people think it looks dramatic. They imagine arguments, cold shoulders, maybe someone suddenly disappearing. But in reality, it almost never starts that way. It starts with something so quiet you barely notice. It starts with a reduction, not a reduction in presence, not yet. A reduction in effort. And this is where the psychology becomes important. There's a principle in behavioral science, sometimes called effort economy. It's the idea that human beings are constantly, unconsciously calculating how much emotional energy to invest in any given interaction. When someone is deeply interested in you, that calculation runs in your favor. They invest more. They think about what to say. They choose their words with care. They add detail, warmth, texture to their communication. But when interest starts declining, the equation shifts. The investment drops. And the first place it shows up, before body language, before distance, before any visible change, is in language. Specifically in how short, how vague, and how non-committal their language becomes. And this brings us to the first word. Sure, that single word, 4 letters, might be one of the most psychologically loaded responses in everyday communication. And most people completely miss it. Think about this for a moment. When someone is genuinely excited about something, when they truly want to do something with you, do they say sure? No, they say absolutely. They say I'd love that. They say yes, let's do it. Sure is not enthusiasm. Sure is compliance without investment. It's the verbal equivalent of a shrug. It means I'm not saying no, but I'm also not leaning in. I'm giving you just enough to avoid conflict, but not enough to actually show up emotionally. And what makes it so dangerous is that it sounds fine. It sounds like agreement. It sounds like a yes. But it's not a yes. It's a yes with the energy removed. And when you start hearing sure where you used to hear excitement, something has already changed. Not on the surface where everything still looks intact, but underneath where the real decisions are being made. Now here's where most people go wrong. They hear sure and they tell themselves it's nothing. They think they're probably just tired. They had a long day. I'm reading too much into it. And sometimes, yes, that's true. One, sure, doesn't mean anything. But behavioral science tells us that patterns matter far more than single events. If sure starts replacing enthusiasm consistently, if it becomes the default tone rather than the exception, what you're witnessing is not fatigue. It's emotional withdrawal. It's the nervous system pulling back its resources from a connection it's no longer prioritizing. The second word is even more invisible, and I think it's actually the most important one. Fine. When someone says things are fine, when you ask how they're doing and they say I'm fine, when you ask about your plans together and they say it's fine, what's actually happening in that moment? On the surface, fine seems neutral. It seems acceptable. But psychologically, fine is the language of someone who has stopped elaborating. And the elaboration is one of the most reliable indicators of emotional engagement. When people care about something, they describe it. They add layers. They tell you how they feel about it. They bring you into their experience. But when they say fine, they're doing the opposite. They're closing the door as politely as possible. They're giving you an answer that technically responds to your question but carries absolutely no emotional content. Fine is the word people use when they've decided that the full truth isn't worth sharing with you. Not because they're dishonest, but because somewhere inside them, the motivation to let you in has quietly disappeared. And this connects to something that I think will shift the way you understand communication forever. In psychology, there's a concept called self-disclosure reciprocity. It means that in healthy relationships, people gradually share more of themselves over time, and they do so in a balanced way. When one person opens up, the other opens up in return. It's a dance. But when someone begins pulling away, one of the first things they stop doing is self-disclosing. They stop volunteering information about their feelings, their thoughts, their inner world. And when you ask directly, they give you the shortest possible answer that doesn't raise alarm. Fine. Good. Okay, these aren't just casual words. They're linguistic walls. And if you pay attention to when they appear, and more importantly, when they replace something more open, you'll see the exact moment the emotional architecture of that relationship started to shift. I want to pause here and be honest with you for a moment. Even though this video uses an AI-generated voice, there is a real person behind it. My name is Fernando, and I am truly grateful that you are here right now. I hope that you and everyone you care about are blessed beyond measure. Now, let me get back to what we were talking about, because the third word is the one that ties everything together. The third word is busy. Now, before you react to that, I know what you're thinking. Everyone is busy. Being busy is real. People have jobs, responsibilities, stress, obligations, and that's true. I'm not saying that every time someone says they're busy, they're losing interest. But here's what I am saying, and this is the part most people never consider. Busy is not just a description of someone's schedule. It is very often a prioritization statement disguised as a logistical one. Because here's the truth that nobody wants to admit. When someone is deeply invested in you, they don't just tell you they're busy. They tell you when they'll be available. They offer alternatives. They say I can't right now, but how about Thursday? They make you feel that even though their time is limited, you still matter within it. But when someone is pulling away, busy becomes a wall instead of a bridge. It becomes final. It carries no follow-up, no offer, no warmth. It sits there, alone, and dares you to push past it. And most people don't, because most people are afraid that if they push, they'll confirm the thing they already feel but don't want to believe. That this person is no longer making space for them. And this is the psychological trap that makes all three of these words so devastating. Sure, fine and busy. Individually, they mean almost nothing. But when they start appearing together, when they form a pattern, when they replace what used to be warmth, curiosity, effort, and presence, they tell a very specific story. They tell the story of someone who is gradually removing themselves from the emotional equation of your relationship while still technically remaining in it. And that's the coolest form of distance, because it gives you just enough to hold on to but never enough to feel secure. There's a term in psychology called ambiguous loss. It was originally used to describe situations where someone is physically present but emotionally absent, or physically gone but with no closure. And I believe that this pattern, this slow withdrawal marked by vague, effortless language, is one of the most common forms of ambiguous loss in everyday relationships. Because the person is still there. They still text back. They still show up sometimes. But something essential, something that used to live in the space between you, is gone, and you feel it. You feel it in your chest when you read their messages. You feel it in the way silence between you used to feel comfortable and now feels heavy. You feel it in the way you start second-guessing yourself, wondering if you did something wrong, wondering if you're being too sensitive, wondering if this is all in your head. But here's what I want you to understand, and this is important. It's not in your head. Your nervous system is designed to detect changes in social connection. Neuroscience has shown that the brain processes social rejection and social withdrawal using some of the same pathways it uses to process physical pain. So when you feel that something is off, when your body tightens slightly every time you see their name on your screen, that's not anxiety, that's data. That's your system telling you that the emotional pattern has changed, even if nothing visible has happened. Now, I promised you earlier that I would help you understand the difference between someone who is genuinely losing interest and someone who is simply going through a hard time. And this distinction is critical because if you get it wrong in either direction, the consequences are real. If you mistake temporary stress for permanent disinterest, you might pull away from someone who actually needs you. And if you mistake disinterest for stress, you might spend months waiting for someone who has already emotionally left. So how do you tell the difference? There's one signal that separates the two, and it's not about words at all. It's about repair. When someone is overwhelmed, stressed, or going through a difficult period, their communication might shrink. They might become short, vague, distant. But here's what they also do eventually. They come back and explain. They circle back. They say, I'm sorry I've been off. Things have been hard. I want you to know it's not about you. That circling back, that act of repair, is the single most important signal in human connection. It tells your nervous system, this person is still invested. The distance was situational, not intentional. But when someone is actually losing interest, there is no repair. There is no coming back to explain. The distance just quietly becomes the new normal. And if you bring it up, if you say, hey, I feel like something has changed between us, you'll often hear something like, no, everything's fine. I've just been busy. And there they are again. Fine. Busy. The same words, doing the same work, building the same invisible wall. So what do you do with this information? Because I don't want to leave you with just awareness. Awareness without direction can become paranoia, and that's the opposite of what I'm trying to create here. The first thing is, don't react to individual words. React to patterns. One sure is nothing. A month of sure is something. One fine is just a quick response. But fine, becoming the only way someone describes their experience with you is a signal worth paying attention to. And the second thing, which is harder but more important, is to check yourself before you assume. Ask directly. Not with accusation, not with fear, but with openness. Say something like, I've noticed a shift and I want to understand it, not to pressure you, but because this matters to me. That kind of honest, non-defensive communication does something powerful. It either opens a door that the other person was afraid to open themselves, or it confirms what you already sensed, which, while painful, gives you the clarity you need to move forward. And here's the final thing I want to leave you with, because I think it's the piece that changes everything. Sometimes the person who's pulling away doesn't even know they're doing it. Emotional withdrawal is not always a conscious decision. Sometimes people start saying sure and fine and busy not because they've decided to leave, but because something inside them has shifted, and they haven't processed it yet. They feel the change, but they don't have language for it. They can't explain what's different because they don't fully understand it themselves. And so they use the easiest, smallest, safest words available to them, not to deceive you, but to buy time while they figure out what they're feeling. And that maybe is the most human part of all of this. We're all, at some point, on one side or the other of this equation. We've all been the one saying fine when we weren't fine, saying sure when we weren't sure, saying busy when the truth was something much more complicated. And we've all been the one on the receiving end, reading those words, feeling that something was wrong, and not knowing whether to speak up or stay quiet. The difference, the real difference, between relationships that survive this and relationships that don't, is not whether the distance happens. It always does. The difference is whether someone is willing to name it. Whether someone is brave enough to say, I feel you pulling away and I'd rather hear the hard truth than live in the comfortable lie of fine. Because the moment you say that, you break the pattern, you disrupt the loop. You tell the other person and you tell yourself that real connection is not about pleasant words and smooth surfaces. It's about the willingness to go to the uncomfortable place and stay there long enough to find out what's true. 3 words, sure, fine, busy. You've heard them 1,000 times, but now you hear them differently. And what you do with that from this moment forward is entirely in your hands.